Black Ship fans, get a sneak peek of the next installment on Patreon. Join Patreon for free and watch short previews of the next Black Ship episodes a day before they drop on YouTube every Tuesday. If you want more, upgrade anytime to watch the full episode completely ad-free. Plus, you get the latest updates first. The link is in the description. Now on with the story. With a final inspection of his reflection in the mirror, Wyatt nodded to himself in satisfaction. After a shower to cool his senses and spending half an hour exploring the ship's network with the use of his datapad, he was more than ready to meet Cynthia and Clara for a much-needed time of relaxation. He chuckled at the thought. Before meeting them, the very idea of leisure time seemed almost pointless. Now he was looking forward to it. Opening his quarters door, Wyatt took an involuntary step back when he saw Declan Oakmoon and his servants kneeling at the other side of the corridor. "What are you doing?" he exclaimed, befuddled. "Have we passed your test of loyalty, my lord?" Declan asked, undisturbed and still bowing his head respectfully. "What test?" Wyatt protested again before his brain fully processed Declan's words. "Wait, does that mean you've been waiting there, kneeling, for nearly an hour?" "The command to rise was never given, my lord. We merely moved to a better position to not disturb others and give you proper respect," Declan answered. Wyatt felt the urge to squeeze his temples but resisted it. Instead, he stepped forth, closing the door in the process. "Look, Declan, was it?" The noble rose his head to meet his gaze. "There's no need for you to do any of this." Declan shook his head. "On the contrary, my lord. We were enemies set against each other, yet you showed compassion and unquestionable honor by sparing my life and helping to save it. Your actions embody the very foundations that House Oakmoon values above all else. Until my debt is repaid, we are under your care and command, my Lord Staples." After hearing Declan's declaration, the heterochromatic-eyed man felt his stomach do a backflip of pure disgust. Managing to restrain himself from insulting the man, he answered, "There's nothing to repay. Go! You're free. Your debt is repaid, or whatever." Declan looked stunned for a moment, but then bowed his head again, even lower than before. "My lord truly embodies the spirit of chivalry within his heart. It will be my joy and pleasure to serve you until my debt is repaid, my lord." "I don't—" Wyatt began to protest, but what could he say? The answer came a few moments later. If he didn't know what to do, then he just needed to ask someone who did, right? "I don't have time for this. I must answer Princess Clara's summons." "Of course, my lord. We shall eagerly wait for your return," Declan announced. "Could you please stop calling me lord?" "Oh, and stand up?" Declan and his servants obeyed without hesitation. "You're free to— Wait, why are you free?" "You're with the traitors." Baffled by the surprising turn of events, Wyatt forgot that Declan was technically a prisoner, so why was he allowed to roam free in the first place? His servants were commoners, which explained their presence, not his. "I paid my ransom eagerly and have renounced the Duke's cause to fulfill my obligations to you, my lord." "My lord father will understand my decision," Declan explained. "We are, however, not part of the Nornavio's crew yet, my lord. We have no duties to tend to nor quarters to return to." Wyatt closed his eyes, not knowing what to do. Just go and find something to do until I call for you again, okay?" Declan nodded once. "Understood, my Lord Staples," he declared, saluted, and then turned to leave. "May your endeavors be fruitful and full of joy, my lord." Wyatt felt something crawling under his skin and huffed with disgust once Declan and his servants were far enough away not to hear him. Turning on his heel, he began to walk faster than usual. Crew members saluted him whenever he walked past them, only to hear faint murmurs at the edge of his hearing range. Some were wary, but most ranged from cautious to excited. The pilot wanted to scoff at their reaction, yet at the same time he understood them for the most part. In their place, though, he'd just keep his distance and mind his business. It didn't take long for him to reach Clara's quarters. Ever guarded by 2 Royal Marines and the pylons, he still had no idea what purpose they served. Upon his arrival, the Royal Marines stepped away from the door a second before it opened. Nodding at them once in appreciation, he made his way into the room only to be immediately hit by the most succulent, fresh, and enticing scent he'd ever smelled in his life. As the door closed behind him, his eyes searched for the source of that scent. He quickly found it on the table he and his friends sat around as constantly as possible. There, he found a tower at least a meter tall divided into 6 circular sections, each smaller as they reached the top. On them, he found all manner of pastries, baked goods, and other sweet things. He recognized the cookies, cakes, and, more so than anything else, veshkoms. He also found Clara wearing a long, pure white sleeveless dress with feathered patterns in different shades of blue etched into it. She held a chocolate cake in one hand while the other gripped a veshkom. Both pastries were half-eaten, and the princess chewed as if her life depended on them. Cynthia was at her side in a similar condition, devouring a long, chocolate-filled, puffy bread with evident satisfaction on her face. Wyatt didn't announce his presence. The thought didn't cross his mind. Instead, he made his way to the table, took his usual seat, and promptly reached for a veshkom and a handful of different delicious cookies. Wordlessly, Cynthia reached out with a large jar in hand and served him a glass of grape juice. Thankful, but with his mouth filled with the sugary relief he'd been craving for what felt like weeks, he took a large gulp of it, enjoying it fully. The trio didn't share a word. The only sounds heard in the room were soft moans of pleasure, chewing, and constantly refilled glasses. Wyatt was the first to satisfy his belly, losing count of how many pieces he'd eaten. He licked his smiling lips and used a handkerchief to clean the edges of his mouth. Now that he'd slowed down, he could appreciate his friends eating freely. As always, Cynthia ate quickly, spending little time enjoying the flavors, but something told him that was how she preferred it. That being said, she was eating more than Clara and he combined. It was not a surprise when she took a sizable bite, chewed on it a few times, swallowed, and repeated the process without much of a pause. But Clara was a different story. He'd seen her eat many times before, from proper meals where she displayed poise and manners beyond his understanding, to merely eating slowly and sipping tea as she talked, rarely losing her image as a princess. But this time was different. Her cheeks were bloated as she greedily took in large mouthfuls, chewing them with gusto and a fervor he'd never seen before. Her fingers were covered in frosting most of the time, and she cleaned them by doing something he'd only thought a commoner like him would do. She licked it off, enjoying it for what it was. She also licked her lips clean constantly and only stopped, stuffing her face with sweets when she took a glass of grape juice and drank it all in a single motion. Just watching them made him smile, and as he watched them, he came to a simple realization. "How much do you eat?" "Plenty," Clara replied after a few seconds of hurried chewing and swallowing. "Go on, Wyatt, don't be shy. Eat more." "Eat! I had Harold prepare more," she exclaimed in a cheerful tone. "I'm satisfied for now," Wyatt replied, politely gulping juice before continuing. "Are feeling better, both of you?" "It's a start," Clara agreed, and Cynthia nodded. "I need to relax and set my mind at ease before I even contemplate continuing to tend to our ongoing debacles," she sighed, absent-mindedly licking her right index finger. A second later, a pleased sigh escaped her lips. Wyatt nodded, then smiled at the princess as she aimed to grab another veshkom. "Clara, when were you going to tell me that I have a claim to the Noir Navio?" "Is that why you fainted?" Clara asked, her violet eyes sparkling with a playful light, while she grabbed her prize and set it on her empty plate for the first time since his arrival. "I was informed of your hurried admission into the medical wing, but not the reason for your faint episode. Am I correct to assume Jincho was involved in that revelation?" "Why bother asking when you can read my mind?" Wyatt countered, trying and failing to match her playfulness, while Cynthia merely shook her head and gave the blonde princess an unamused stare. Clara ignored her bodyguard's judging stare as she pouted slightly in defeat. "I had this convoluted plan to have you discover it yourself at a later point where I could see your reaction. Such a shame, but I suppose I'll accept my loss this time. Happenstance is such a scary and unpredictable thing, isn't it?" "Clara!" Cynthia warned, halting her sweets feasting. "You, my dearest Cynthia Winfield, have no sense of humor, and you're a terrible monster for denying your princess so," Clara said as she crossed her arms. "I'm merely preventing my unhinged princess from making a greater fool of herself by allowing her wicked sense of humor to take over her better judgment." "You'll have your fun once the transmission starts at any point," Cynthia countered, unamused. Clara gasped, offended, and pressed a hand against her chest. Then she turned to Wyatt. "Wyatt, did you hear her? That blue-haired monster has dared offend your princess. Go now, defend my honor." Wyatt, try as he might, couldn't stop smiling as he replied, "I'm sorry, princess, but I'm very fond of life. How else am I going to enjoy more of these sweets?" "Betrayal! Must a princess suffer the wrathful mockery of two scoundrels?" Clara declared overdramatically, only to end her performance by taking a bite out of her veshkom. After swallowing, she continued, "I suppose, then, that you wish to have an answer and that bribing you with sweets and other luxuries is out of the question?" "I could be convinced," Wyatt replied, playing along. Clara's lips curled slightly upward. And risk losing half of my precious pastries? I already have to feed this bottomless void next to me. I don't need another putting an even bigger strain on my supplies, she declared, gaining an eye roll from Cynthia and an amused chuckle from Wyatt. No. I believe the best course of action is to disclose secrets kept. Let us begin with the easiest point. She paused. Her immaculate manners returned as she sipped from her glass, uncaring that such an illusion had been shattered mere moments ago. Truth be told, Wyatt, at the time it wasn't my intention for you to lay claim to the Noir Navio. After knowing more about you during our travel to Woodshaft and our brief stay there, I decided at that moment that you'd prove to be an asset to me as my personal pilot. Her eyes narrowed slightly for a brief moment. Nothing could have prepared me for the events that would follow, but I was determined to ensure your survival. Having you rename a prized, captured ship was a safeguard measure to shield you if worse came to pass. Namely speaking, uptight, jealous officers perceiving you as a potential threat to their precious status quo, traditions, and nonsensical values. It did happen, but in a manner that escaped my plans. Wyatt nodded in understanding. Then, should I just revoke it? The ship is yours, no? You can, but I'd prefer for you to hold on to it, said the princess. After the events that took place in Hastrung, I'd rather you not be left without a hidden shield. Furthermore, I, too, will not leave things to chance. Better for the Nornavio to be commanded by you than by some inept moron seeking glory, prestige, or the fulfillment of their own ambitions. Wyatt tilted his head in confusion. But how does that work? It's hard for me to comprehend all this. To put it in simple terms, Cynthia answered, you don't own the Nornavio. You have an ownership claim, as it was you who renamed it as such after capturing the Samuel's Glory. However, this is more of a legal safety measure and an emergency-only status. If, for example, Redford was undisposed and Clara was off board, and both of them were unable to give a direct command or appoint another provisional captain, then the Noir Navio will recognize your claim and lock command away from everyone but you. It also means that with a valid claim over this ship that belongs to me and House Astor, you can't simply be removed by the whims and wishes of superior officers. Clara smirked. You won't leave the Noir Navio unless I or my brother Dearest says so, Wyatt. There was a flash of surprise in Wyatt's heart, but it quickly passed. As he thought about it, it made sense. He was loyal to Clara, the prince, and the principality. In the case of a mutiny or a boarding action, keeping his claim of ownership and potential command of the Noir Navio a secret could prove to be the difference between annihilation and victory. The thought of commanding the ship crossed his mind, but he rejected it instantly. If the time came for him to take the seat again, then he would. Until then, he was happy where he was. Secondly, let me be honest with you. I promised I would disclose this little secret of mine before, but please, I implore you, Wyatt, that you must never reveal this to anyone. Only those closest to me know of this secret. And you're going to be one of them, Clara continued as she reached across the table to grasp Wyatt's left hand as he was about to stand up. Please don't kneel or pledge yourself to me. I only require your promise as my friend. Nothing else. I already have your loyalty and I'm touched by it. But for this, I only require your promise as Wyatt Staples. Wyatt's eyes widened as he considered kneeling and swearing his life that he would keep her secret. Then he relaxed, gently turning his hand around to give her smooth, soft hand a short-lived squeeze. I promise, he said, letting her go. Clara smiled and took a deep breath. First, let me clear a misconception. I can't read your thoughts or usurp the sanctity of your mind, Wyatt. Yours or anyone else. If I could, she paused, shaking her head a few times in dismissal. What I can do is something far simpler and complex at the same time. I can sense surface thoughts and perceive ideas, intentions, and emotions. Isn't that the same as reading minds? He asked, confused and surprised at the same time. In theory? Yes. In practice? I'm afraid it is vastly different, Clara began, straightening as she continued. I don't get a clear image of what I'm perceiving. Allow me to demonstrate. Go on, think about something. Wyatt obeyed, curiosity driving him forward. Thanks to Clara's vague insinuations and his previous experiment that confirmed she could read his mind, he focused on Mr. Warlow, his parents and brothers. He remembered carving wood on a warm day, about seeing his younger brothers playing with a small drone, of his father and mother holding hands as they danced to a slow melody, while Mr. Warlow arrived to join in to celebrate Wam's birthday. The old man would never miss a chance for free food. The memory made him smile. You're thinking about your family and someone else? A teacher of sorts. A good memory of a peaceful day, Clara declared, and Wyatt nodded. I can't read or see what you are thinking, yet I can perceive information. Family. Brothers. Home. Happy. Summer. Warm day. Old man. Grumpy. Dance. Playing. These are the things I can perceive. It is up to me to deduce, string together, and give meaning to these thoughts and emotions into a coherent form or idea. Some are simple enough, while others are more difficult. I also can only work with what knowledge I have at my disposal. Wyatt was speechless as he recalled their interactions and those moments when she seemed to know exactly what he was thinking, or at least partially. Now it made sense, but he couldn't wrap his mind around how she was able to do it. What she explained seemed so random and incoherent. How in the world would she even begin to use such an ability effectively? It's not easy, Clara replied with a soft giggle while Wyatt stared at her in rapt attention. I mean not to brag, but it is thanks to my intellect. Ability to read the intentions of others, read body language, expressions, and predict conducts and reactions that allow me to make use of this ability of mine more effectively. As you can imagine, this grants me a great advantage. But it is not a faultless system. Even one such as I can't be right all the time. Not to mention the other drawbacks. Drawbacks? Wyatt inquired. The princess raised a finger. I can't read complex ideas, making me useless to perceive strategies, combat tactics, or deeper thoughts, such as ploys of treason, assassination, or detailed specifics. She raised another finger. I can't turn off this ability. It is always present and active, and it only has an effective range of use of 20 meters in diameter. A third finger was raised. I can't pinpoint the thoughts and emotions of a single person in a crowd easily. I must actively identify and isolate what I wish to focus on, like I did back on Matcha. A fourth finger joined the previous trio. And finally, I'm susceptible to strong emotions. The stronger the emotions are, the more I feel them as if they were my own. Wyatt remained stunned for several seconds, absorbing everything Clara had revealed to him. He couldn't imagine how loud the things she perceived were, but he was sure that being surrounded by many people had to be a thoroughly unpleasant experience. Then his mind drifted to when he shared his past with them. His expression turned crestfallen. Did I harm you? Clara shook her head as Cynthia reached to Wyatt's shoulder, offering her support. It was a most terrible experience, but you didn't hurt me, Wyatt. I only experienced a fraction of what you were reliving. Offering a kind smile, she continued. Don't dwell on it. From the moment I beseeched the diviners, I knew the consequences. Feeling reassured, but still partially guilty at the thought that he harmed his friend, even involuntarily, Wyatt frowned. You sought out the diviners? I began investigating them after we gained our titles, Clara replied. They are far away, but are largely peaceful, focused on their own affairs. I don't claim to know them deeply, but the least I can assure you is that they are innocent in our current struggle. She paused and pressed her right index finger against her temple. I contacted them and bought one of their psionic implants. I received it through secrecy and duplicitous actions 2 years after I first learned of them in detail. I don't know what to say except that I promise you again that I won't tell anyone about your secret, Clara, Wyatt replied with a serious expression. Out of curiosity, how much did it cost? Clara laughed. No offense, Wyatt, but if you're planning on getting one for yourself, you can forget it. I was barely able to convince them to sell it to me for a rather exorbitant price. Truly exorbitant, she repeated with a hollow look in her eyes. Wyatt winced at the tone she used and immediately exiled the idea out of his mind. He had no interest in knowing what exorbitant was for a royal. Thank you, Clara, for trusting me. I wouldn't have told you or dropped hints every now and then if I didn't trust you, Wolfhound, Clara said with humor. Wolfhound. That explains why that name was everywhere in the local network. They were talking about me? Wyatt asked, unamused. You can thank Maximilian for that. He mentioned it intentionally, and your new nickname has spread. Wyatt the Wolfhound Staples. It has a dangerous edge to it. I personally approve of it, Cynthia explained with an almost cheeky smirk. So the Roaring Thunder wishes to jumpstart your legend. Many would consider it an honor. I, too, approve, Clara joined in with a winning smile. That reminds me, she said before standing up. Calmly, she made her way to her trophy shelf, opened it, and retrieved from it a clean, warped helmet. I had it cleaned, but now it is high time for you to claim your trophy, Wyatt, she said as she closed her shelf. Making her way back to the table, she sat down and put the helmet in front of Wyatt. Maximilian's helmet. Proof that you brought the lone wolf down. Wyatt picked it up and stared at it for what felt like hours. Part of him wanted to give it to Clara, knowing she'd appreciate the gift immensely. But a bigger part of him told him to hold on to it, not out of pride or a sense of accomplishment or bloated ego, but as a reminder of a lesson learned. I could keep it safe, Clara proposed in a sing-song tone. Absolutely not, Cynthia interfered, eyes narrowed at her friend. Wyatt, do not fuel her insatiable obsession. Not to worry, Cynthia. I wasn't planning on giving it away so easily, Wyatt confessed, causing Clara to sigh in defeat. Since you mentioned Maximilian, Clara, what are we to do about Javier and the other traders that landed across Hago? What about them? Clara asked with disinterest. Why should we spend any effort in retrieving them? Javier Wunder is a savvy economist that I would rather not deposit back into my uncle's service. I will admit that his mutiny was fortunate for our cause, but he is still our enemy. The majority of the traders landed on Hago's second continent. We'll give Tornell a bounty for their capture. If they are captured, killed by the inhabitants, or die by the planet's predators and conditions, then that suits our goals equally fine. Her eyes narrowed slightly. I don't deem Javier as a coward. What other options were at his disposal? But that doesn't mean I shall show him or his followers any mercy either. I don't entirely agree with leaving them to their luck, but they made their decision, Wyatt hummed softly. Most of them are blue bloods at any rate, are they not? Yes, Cynthia confirmed simply. And what about us? What is our next step? Wyatt asked. I'll contact my brother later, asking him to contact Genak so he can dispatch a comm buoy to Hastrung. Until it arrives and is activated, we'll remain here. The Noir Navio needs repairs. Fortunately for us, there are plenty of materials and resources to fix her. We need to sort out the captives inside the Eternal Garden. That alone will take days to complete. I'll host a small ceremony tomorrow to celebrate our victories over the Drazen and the traitors alike, issue promotions, and a memorial ceremony to respect the fallen. Then there's the issue of claiming and recovering salvage. Redford has already collected every surviving traitor fighter to replenish our losses. We'll also need to establish your headquarters as my provisional bridge between House Ferentis, Tornell, and myself. Don't worry, as I said before, you won't leave my side, Wyatt. With the comm buoy in place, you'll be able to contact and be contacted by both parties whenever the need arises, Clara explained casually. We have our hands full, don't you agree? I'll do my best, Wyatt replied. Fret not, Wyatt. Your position is largely symbolic. As long as Tornell maintains the peace, he doesn't get any ideas of self-aggrandizement or is disposed of by another would-be dictator, you'll be largely ignored. Incidentally, it is House Ferentis who poses the greatest danger depending on who is dispatched to ensure the agreement is honored and followed, Cynthia replied, crossing her arms. You'll receive permanent quarters in the Eternal Garden and a small patch of land on Hago's surface to claim as your property. I highly suggest that you leave plans for a small business operation. I can help you with the details when you've decided what industry you wish to pursue, Clara added, before taking a bite out of her veshcom. It is a good learning experience that'll help you manage budgets and teach you the power of economics. I'm looking forward to it, Wyatt replied with the same enthusiasm he gave to Cynthia and her upcoming real training sessions. Cynthia scoffed with a smirk, then reached to her side. She brought a small black box up a moment later and presented it to Wyatt. The pilot received it, confused. They're clean and decontaminated, she said cryptically. Curiously, Wyatt opened the rectangular box and his eyes widened when he saw what was inside. Carefully, he reached into it and pulled out a 4-inch long, dark as obsidian claw that could only belong to a Drazen. The black-haired man's eyes turned to Cynthia with the deepest gratitude before tracing his fingers alongside the claw's smooth surface. There's 30 in there, the red-armored woman said. Matching your exploits in gin tracks. I thought it would be a good symbolic gift. They're incredibly hard, sturdy, and the tip can easily pierce skin with little to no effort. Be careful with them. You can keep them or do with them whatever you want, Wyatt. Thank you, Cynthia. Wyatt grinned, dropping the claw back into the box with the other claws. I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but thank you. Cynthia closed her eyes and nodded slightly in response. Oh, it's starting, Clara said all of a sudden as a large screen descended from the ceiling. On it, a simple message could be read, Simulated Exhibition Match. 1 vs 1. Redford Vorpal Strike Redford vs Maximilian the Roaring Thunder Usurek. Beneath it, a countdown of only a single minute was running. I didn't see this before. Wyatt commented, surprised. It was announced 5 minutes ago. Right on schedule. The entire crew deserved a moment to unwind and enjoy a good match featuring two great pilots now, don't they? Clara said, unable to hide her eager smile. Not everyone finds fighter matches, races, and dogfights nearly as much as you do, Clara, Cynthia commented. I should charge you for treason for uttering such cruel things. Now shush you! It's about to begin, Clara said, her eyes focused on the screen while Cynthia chuckled to herself, also turning her attention to the screen. Wyatt found Clara's energetic responses endearing, and he was quickly reminded of her genuine gratitude when he convinced her to drive a shuttle for at least a few moments. An idea manifested in his mind, and he quickly removed it from his mind, hoping Clara was too preoccupied with the screen to notice it. His eyes landed on the screen just in time to see it split in the middle, each side presenting a standard Raptor fighter floating among a small debris field. They're going to fight in locked corners? Cynthia asked, recognizing the simulation scenario. They both want to give a good show, Clara replied excitedly, fingers fidgeting constantly. Wyatt didn't say anything. He knew the simulation, and he'd been using it heavily alongside his squadron in their practices. It was a challenging scenario with very little room for error. Active tactical mines were placed at random locations outside the spawning points. Debris was abundant and a constant hazard. The gutted remains of a ship floated nearby, and drones lay in wait, ready to destroy anything within their sensor range. The match began with little fanfare. Both fighters rushed out immediately on opposite sides of the map in search of each other. The goal was simple: destroy the enemy. Maximilian was the first to make a move by launching one of his missiles without a clear objective. The reason was obvious a few moments later. Somehow Maximilian had detected a tactical mine and intentionally detonated it. He took cover behind a large piece of debris until he emerged again. He created himself a space to maneuver freely, Wyatt commented, surprised and mentally noting the tactic used. It was situational and all but gave your position away, but it was better than constantly dodging and weaving through debris, asteroids, or other junk in a tight situation. Yes, but look. Redford moves like a graceful ice dancer, Clara commented, her wide smile never faltering. What's an ice dancer? Wyatt asked himself, but as he watched Redford moving through the debris field without a single moment's hesitation, he concluded that it didn't matter. He stared in amazement. He was good. He knew it. But Redford moved in his fighter with such ease that it made him feel inadequate. A trio of drones suddenly appeared from behind Redford's fighter, angrily firing at him and missing every shot as the commander made use of the debris to confuse the drone's targeting systems while he continued to advance. Then, in a swift movement, Redford deactivated his engine, made a quick rotation, launched a single missile, and fired a stream of coil gun shots before reactivating his engine, continuing forth. The missile impacted the leading drone, destroying it in the act, while the other two were lightly damaged. The coil gun shots landed next on the second drone, depleting its meager shields and destroying it. The explosion ripped it to pieces, and one of them struck the third drone, shifting its trajectory long enough for it to crash against a piece of debris, resulting in its explosion a moment later. Yes! Did you see that? Clara exclaimed, clapping vigorously. Redford is going to win. I just know it. I wouldn't be so sure. Maximilian's reputation and skills are not to be taken lightly. Look, Cynthia countered, more than used to Clara's excited outbursts. Wyatt turned to Maximilian's side of the screen to find 5 drones bearing down on him. Instead of panicking, Maximilian moved in to face them head-on in the space he'd created. Free to move as he desired, he lured the drones in to attack him in patterns of his design. It was like watching a Clixel hunter baiting one of the big dumb birds into a kill zone. Drones were drones, and drones were stupid after all. The Roaring Thunder didn't waste a missile on the drones. Instead, he used precise, controlled shots to destroy 3 of them quickly. He tricked the remaining 2 drones into crashing into each other after some quick, violent turns and the release of flares, baffling their sensors. That was beautiful, Clara applauded. The way he moved and twisted at the last turn? Brilliant! Wyatt nodded. And he's not piloting his custom-made fighter. That thing was a monstrosity, and it could move just like that. The use of flares at the end? I agree. It was a brilliant move. Right, Clara exclaimed. Ah, there's the old man, Cynthia commented as Redford came out of the debris field only to enter Maximilian's zone. The 2 pilots didn't immediately rush for one another. They waited, approaching carefully and analyzing each other, taunting silently for their opponent to make the first move. Wyatt could hear Clara's breathing as she refused to blink for fear of losing a moment of detail. Then, Redford made the first move by launching 2 missiles and accelerating to his left, trying to return to the debris field. Maximilian responded in kind, launching 2 missiles and firing a hail of coil gun shots in the direction Redford was heading toward. The distance between the two had been reduced significantly, and Redford was forced to alter his path or risk being hit by Maximilian's shots a second later. The 2 missiles intercepted each other as Redford faced Maximilian head-on. Maximilian fired his last missile at the same time he let loose with his coil guns. Redford moved gracefully in random patterns, firing his coil guns with controlled bursts as the missile charged unopposed. Maximilian was forced to wave and dodge incoming coil gun shots as he approached, unable to return fire with any accuracy properly. It didn't take long for the missile to reach its target, and Redford, in a quick, violent maneuver, dipped as he released his flares. The missile exploded behind his fighter, hitting its shields and inflicting minor damage to its engines. "Come on, old man," Cynthia muttered worriedly while Clara was rocking back and forth, biting her lower lip. For his part, Wyatt focused on the dogfight, learning every movement, analyzing every decision taken, and working on alternative tactics on the fly. His smile was wide and sincere. He was watching 2 real master pilots fighting, and it was beautiful. Maximilian proved again to be anything but subtle, aggressive, but brutally cunning, intelligent, and with a talent to control his opponent's movements. Redford was more cautious, resourceful, and relied on his high maneuverability, speed, and nearly impossible to pin down. At the start of the match, there was no clear winner in his mind. Now, the balance had shifted, but something wasn't right. He couldn't put his finger on it, but while Redford seemed to be at a clear disadvantage now that Maximilian was chasing him, something made him doubt that it was so simple. He was proven right when, in a sharp turn, Redford sacrificed his left wing to force its debris onto Maximilian's fighter. The roaring thunder dodged just in time to evade it, which put him in the path of Redford's last missile. The aged commander had, throughout the short-lived chase, returned to the exit point Maximilian had denied him earlier on. His 4th and last missile was there, never fired and simply left to drift until the perfect moment. Maximilian realized the trap too late as the missiles activated and struck his fighter fully, depleting its shields. Before he could do anything else, Redford appeared from below, firing his coil guns. In a single burst, Maximilian's fighter exploded and the message, "Redford Vorpal Strike Kalen, winner," appeared on screen as the heavily damaged fighter soared through as the screen faded to black. "Yes!" Clara half-shouted, jumping to her feet and clapping uncontrollably. "Vorpal Strike! Vorpal Strike!" she chanted in celebration over and over again. "It looks like the old man can still bite," Cynthia commented proudly. "I never thought Commander Redford was that good," Wyatt said, joining Clara in clapping to celebrate his commanding officer's well-earned victory. "There's no way I could face him and hope to win. Usually I'd say that you shouldn't sell yourself short, Wyatt, but in this case, you may be right." Uncle Redford was the greatest fighter pilot of his time. A gold ace, a single mark away from becoming platinum. A man who refused to become a lone wolf. His victories are as many as the enemies he destroyed. The annihilator of Zargaxi. The beheader of pirates. The Vorpal Strike. "Vorpal Strike!" Clara exclaimed, singing about the accomplishments and fame that his name carried. Wyatt smiled and turned to Cynthia. Leaning in, he whispered, "Is she always so lively when it comes to her hobbies?" "Worse." "She's pretty tame right now," Cynthia commented. Clara immediately turned to them, blushing madly. "Shush, you two. I'm your princess, not your court jester." Cynthia and Wyatt laughed, lightly bumping fists as Clara returned to her seat, only to devour her veshcom with a smile plastered all over her face. Wyatt reached for a cookie when he suddenly remembered what he wanted to ask Clara about. "Clara, I have a problem and I need your help," he said. In response, he received a hand gesture, pushing him to continue. "How do I get rid of a noble who pledged his service to me?" Cynthia and Clara both froze instantly, with the former stopping mid-chew while the latter almost choked on some juice. Wyatt took the silence as a request to elaborate further. "Declan Oakmoon pledged himself to me alongside his servants." "Is there a way to get rid of them?" "He what?" Clara exclaimed, her voice carrying her more than evident shock and surprise. 2 hours later, Wyatt left Clara's quarters with mixed feelings. On one side, he enjoyed spending time with his friends again, eating as many sweets and baked goods as he wanted, and knitting for an hour straight, much to Cynthia's frustration. But on the other, he was pretty much stuck with Declan Oakmoon. This wasn't Royal Navy affairs. This was noble traditions and standings. She admitted that she'd permitted Declan to board the Noir Navio to, as far as she was concerned, thank him personally for saving his life. She'd never expected Declan to pledge himself in honor and all but swear loyalty and fealty to him. But Clara, being her usual mischievous, controlling self, advised him to make use of the situation in his favor. How? Now that's the question of the day, isn't it? He thought tiredly. He began to walk away when he noticed an oddity. The 2 Royal Marines guarding Clara's quarters weren't there. Just as he was about to turn around and knock on the door, something grabbed the back of his neck. He was unconscious before he could realize what was happening. "Objective secured," said a Royal Marine as he materialized, holding Wyatt's unconscious body. "Moving him to the designated location, Captain Milcades."